When I was 13 years old, a typical Friday night at my best friend Billy's house went like this. Billy, his older sister, and I watched TV at full volume while his mother nagged nonstop in a French-Canadian accent. And then Billy would shriek, "Shut up, Ma! I can't hear the TV!" And sister eventually threw a shoe at Mom hard, and everyone screamed in a war of all against all. And meanwhile, the sound of cooing voices and cute music and canned laughter continued from the Brady Bunch on TV. I was a nice, polite kid, quiet and respectful. Or, in the view of bullies, I was a little faggot. Queer bait. Queer bait. That boys would come up with an insult like queer bait could only happen in the 1970s when there were at least 3 homosexual pedophile predators per square mile. It was the heyday of the so-called sexual revolution, when objections to perversion were called hang-ups, and the likes of Jerry Sandusky had their day in the sun. Little faggots like me walked the streets at all hours like wiggling worms, baiting hooks in a sea full of child molesters, who, like Coach Sandusky, were considered do-gooder heroes. Nice, polite 13-year-old boys had 2 main predators back then, the bully and the child molester, both seeking a variation of one sick need to dominate and subjugate a weaker person. Their purpose was to strip the vulnerable boy of any hope of dignity he may have. They lay their hands on you, and you too become worthless, infected with their despair. On one particular Friday night, after the tempers rose and fell at Billy's house, after the shoe was thrown and voices were hoarse, and there was nothing more to watch on TV, I had to walk home. There were 2 ways to go from my house to my friend's house on the other side of town. One I called the back way, through neighborhoods with dark streets, and the other through town, which takes the well-lit main street. That night, I chose to go through town, and that has made all the difference. Crossing the bridge over the creek, across the street from the old factory, I saw a group of 5 boys under the yellow streetlight in front of a corner store. The store was closed, and the streets were empty, except for those 4 taller boys and 1 shorter one. The shorter one seemed to be the center of attention. He was animated and cocky. I thought about crossing to the other side of the street, but I was already in their view, so crossing over would only make me more noticeable. My choice was, on the one hand, to walk past them, pretending to be unafraid, and be called queerbait, but preserve at least some of my pride. On the other hand, I could cross over to the other side of the street, catch the same insults, but feel like a coward. Boyhood was for me, as for all boys to some degree, I guess, one long challenge to my fledgling pride. There was the constant fear of being a sissy, a mama's boy, a weakling, a loser, the one who backs down, the prey of bullies, the disappointment to fathers, coaches, and teachers, and the scorn of pretty girls. The fear of being good for nothing but queer bait. So I kept walking forward, staring straight ahead. I decided to endure their insults and jeers and congratulate myself later for being brave. From about 20 feet away, I saw clearly the bigger boys' ridiculous mascot, their little pit bull, Brillo-haired and heavy-browed, with goat-like wide-set eyes locked on me, and he began hopping and barking and spitting insults and foaming at the mouth. I held my head up and I walked on by, but the little asshole kept coming. He shoved me from behind, and I stumbled, raising the delight of the bigger boys who were cheering him on. "Get him, Hornsey! Kick his ass!" Hornsey. I'd heard that name before. He had a reputation for being violent. Or, as we say in the local dialect, Hornsey don't fucking care. He's fucking crazy. Hornsey was a high school freshman, 2 years older than me. And the other boys must have been juniors or seniors in high school. These were the cretins doomed to live and die in this sad town, trying to drag down with them a soft boy like me with my faggoty pretension of dignity. Even though I was younger than Hornsey, I was taller. So that made me look like a challenge. I was just the right kind of faggot to fulfill Hornsey's needs, to win the love and approval of the older boys. I walked fast enough to get away, but not so fast as to make it look like I was running away. And the rabid runt taunted me down one block, across a street, halfway down another block. Sensing that I was going to get away, Hornsey dove toward me and whacked me in the ear with his fist. My brain jolted and made a flash of white, and my ear roared with a high pitch. And the scene spun around, and rage exploded in a scream, and I threw my whole body at Hornsey, flailing my fists at his ugly face. And I remember clearly the spit on his lips, and the shiny blood from his nose, and the wild bovine look in his eyes. He was truly surprised. All he could do was try to protect his wretched face. For such an obnoxious, tough kid, Hornsey seemed pretty defenseless against the unfiltered rage of 13-year-old queer bait. I pinned Hornsey on the lawn of the Baptist church. The cheers of encouragement from the older boys turned to quiet concern. I was in an altered state, poised to hit Hornsey's face again, and suddenly a large hand grabbed the back of my shirt and yanked me to my feet. It was a red-faced, scowling policeman. He shouted in my face, and I quote, because I always remember this, "You think you're a tough son of a bitch?" I stared at the cop for about 3 seconds as I transitioned from the shock of being unjustly attacked into the shock of being unjustly accused. And I exploded right back into the cop's face with lung-shredding fury. "You fucking idiot! This kid attacked me! I was doing nothing but walking home!" Yeah, I called the police officer a fucking idiot. An accurate picture seemed to slowly come into focus for the cop, and he let go of my shirt and stepped back. He recognized Hornsey and the bigger punks. He didn't say anything for a moment, but I didn't care what he had to say. I turned and walked away without looking back. I didn't stop until I was home in my bedroom. In those days, we were able to slip in and out of our house without being seen by our parents. Well, my heart didn't slow down. My chest was heaving, and chaos filled my 13-year-old skull. I wanted revenge. As an adult, looking back on that night, I realized it was a kind of perfect storm. All of the elements were in place for a life-altering tragedy. You see, hidden in my room at that time, on that night, was a heavy, pearl-handled Smith & Wesson .45 caliber pistol my friend Billy and I had stolen from a cabin in the woods earlier that summer. We thought the cabin was abandoned, so we went in there, and there was the gun and a box of bullets on a shelf. And seeing a handgun like this triggers a boy's adrenaline. It creates both panic and desire. It's a flash of breathless realization that it's wrong, it's deadly dangerous, and yet it's instant manhood, it's power, fearlessness. It invokes images of warrior soldiers, righteous cops, and romantic gangsters with their twisted codes of honor. They're images of manhood, street justice, telling tales of the tragically, wrongfully accused, misunderstood heroes fighting their way through this unjust world. I pulled the gleaming gun out of its hiding place, and I felt its heft in my hand. It was already loaded. There was no deciding. I would act on adrenaline while it gave me the courage to do what I thought needed to be done. I didn't make an effort to conceal the gun as I ran through my dark neighborhood. I put the gun up under my shirt as I darted across the lighted main street. And I ran along a parallel street until I got a view of the corner where Hornsey's gang was. They were gone. The streets were empty and quiet. My adrenaline was running out and I felt exhausted. And just then, the hum of a slowly moving car coming up from behind me gave me a jolt. Shit, it's the cops. The car pulled up, the driver's window rolled down, and a dumpy, balding, middle-aged man with thick glasses looked at me nervously. Not a cop. I held the gun to my belly under my shirt. He said, and I quote this exactly, after more than 40 years, I still remember this. What are you doing out here so late? And his eyes darted. Don't you know there's a guy driving around and he wants you to get into his car? And you can't get out of his car until he gets what he wants? And you know what he wants? He wants to blow. What would you do if this guy got you in his car? Now, ordinarily, I would have been flustered and tongue-tied by such a bizarre confrontation. But in the past half hour, fear had been revealed to me to be an illusion, and I had just won a fight that I didn't start, and I shouted obscenities into a cop's face with impunity. So, without hesitation, I pulled the gun out of my shirt, and I said, that's why I carry a gun. And the pervert's nervous, darting eyes widened, and he sped off without another word. And in this way, on one evening in 1975, at age 13, I overcame 2 natural predators. But that's not the end of the story. I hated Hornsey with a special hatred, heretofore unknown. And memories of that night were never far from my recall. But I don't believe Hornsey ever knew my name or even noticed when I entered high school 2 years later. At that time, I had a nightmare. It was one of the most realistic dreams that I've ever had. I dreamed I woke up, sat up in my bed, and looked out the window in my room. There was a porch roof outside my window, and standing in the snow on the roof, there were 5 bloodied boys taunting me. A grotesque and blood-soaked Hornsey stood in the front of the pack, snarling at me like a dog. They were calling me to come outside. The snow was speckled with their blood, and their heads appeared to be caved in. And the scene frightened me so much, I woke up and I turned the light on in my room. With the light on, I couldn't see out the window. And I was afraid of what was out there. I could only see my reflection. And for a moment, I was afraid to go to the window. So I turned the light off. And I saw nothing but dark, silent snow and a little distant streetlight. I went to school the next morning. And in our school, we had a smoking lounge outside the side entrance doors. It's amazing to think how many high school kids in 1977 smoked, and smoked in the school smoking lounge with a note from their parents. Kids went to the smoking lounge first thing in the morning to steam up a cigarette before class. And that morning, I saw kids standing in huddles in the hallways, speaking in hushed tones. Out in the smoking lounge, there were also huddles and hushed tones. One of my stoner friends bummed a cigarette from me, and he said, "Did you hear about Hornsey and those guys?" Huh? I know that I dreamed about them, but how did he know about them? They were in a car accident, totaled. It killed them instantly. I stood statue still, and I wondered if I really woke up this morning. Hornsey and those guys had appeared to me in a dream only hours earlier. So after school, a group of boys and I got together to go to the towing garage where they have a wreck yard. We wanted to see the smashed up car from the accident. It had been squashed like an accordion in a collision with a tree, and a shattered, bloodied windshield was still partially attached to the car, and attached to the shattered glass in the center of the fracture was a clump of human flesh with a bloody strand of curly hair dangling from it. Hornsey's. It's a true story.